Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks again for joining us for another one of our Webinar Wednesday series. My name is Chelsea McGuire. I'm the Government Relations Director here at Arizona Farm Bureau, and I am thrilled to have with us this morning from Copper State Consulting Group, Mr. Stan Barnes. Stan will probably be a familiar face to several of us, and we're excited to hear from him today. Before we do that, though, I do want to go through just a couple of housekeeping tips. The first is that as attendees, you're muted on today's webinar, but you can still communicate with us through the question and answer box. Just find the question mark icon on your screen and click on that, and that's how we'll be chatting together today, or live and in real time. If you're a social media person, don't forget to leave your thoughts on today's program using the hashtag AZFB Webinar Wednesdays. We'll make sure to promote those tweets and see those tweets as we see them. And then if you've missed any of our other webinar series from this month, you can find them again. We have all of the recordings online at azfb.org. Just click on News and Resources and then click down to the webinars page. So with all of that out of the way, let's introduce Stan. Stan has been involved in truly every facet of Arizona politics over the last 30 years. At age 27, he was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives, and he served 2 terms there before being elected to the Arizona Senate. And in January of 1997, he founded Copper State Consulting, which now is one of the most highly respected and well-renowned political consulting firms in the state. Stan's a frequent guest on radio and TV. I know I've heard him on my drive into work from time to time, and so you probably have too. And together with his team, they tackle the full spectrum of public policy issues, and they do a phenomenal job at it. Stan was called one of the 5 most influential Republican consultants in Arizona by Campaigns and Elections magazine. So well-deserved accolade, but I'm going to end his bio with what I think is the high point, which is that Stan is an Arizona native who was raised on a cotton farm in Pinal County. And of course, cotton farms in Pinal County are where all good people get their start, Stan. So thank you for being here with us today, from one Pinal County cotton kid to another. We're really glad to have you. And you are still muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself from your end. Yep.
There we go. Now you can hear me, I hope. Good?
Got it.
Yes, good. Excellent. Thank you, Chelsea. And I appreciate that. Yes, all good people come from hard work in Pinal County and laying under a tractor in the summertime. Yeah, that's the way. That's where you learn these things. The opposite of politics. But yeah, it's great to be here.
Very much so. Well, let's dive right in. Stan, of course, is here with us today to talk about, just give us a quick update and overview of the federal election. I don't know if there is any such thing as a quick update and overview of the current federal election, but we're going to try. So Stan, first question, just to start us off, let's start with the big ticket one, right? The one everybody knows about. The presidential election. It was Saturday, November 7th, when AP called the race in favor of former Vice President Joe Biden. It wasn't until I think Thursday the 12th that Arizona was officially called by all the major networks. And then last week, President-elect Biden really began putting his transition team together. We're seeing some of, what senior White House officials are going to look like, and seeing some names. But nevertheless, across the country, the race is really still largely unsettled. So tell us about the current state of that race, President Trump's legal challenges to the election, and sort of where are we right now?
Well, I think I'm stating the obvious for anyone paying attention, that we're in a very delicate time in U.S. history. We have this wonderfully unorthodox president that half the country cannot tolerate, and the other half thinks is saving the world. And in the midst of a very close election, President Trump, is behaving true to form and does not follow the traditional protocols of the U.S. presidency. Instead, does it his way, for good or for ill. And that dynamic has, I think, got a lot of Americans just wondering, where is our stable footing? And so I find it an incredibly important time in history. We're all living through it, and it's our blessing, or maybe our curse, to live through it. The election's not over because the president has not conceded it and is litigating it in key states that, if for some reason the president's successful, would just turn the whole table over on this U.S. election. And I don't know that that's ever happened in the history of our country. We've certainly had presidential races go to the U.S. House of Representatives. And I remember in the history books thinking, that seems incredible and like anachronistic. How could that actually work? But we might be going there. We might be going there. If I don't believe personally, personal opinion, I don't believe that the grand conspiracy that elections can be stolen by collaborative groups of dozens or maybe hundreds of people in different states, keeping in mind we have 50 state elections to decide the presidency. I don't believe that. But there are some of the most credible people in the country that have reputations to protect in the legal world and otherwise that are making assertions that are incredible, if true, incredible. And if those assertions about the software system that did the counting of millions of ballots in Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and yes, Maricopa County, if those assertions are true, then we've got a real problem on our hands, a real problem. And it's a crisis level problem. And I think there many people who are hearing me say these words are either rolling their eyes like somehow that's the conspiracy and it should be dismissed, or are hearing it and saying, you're right, we need to get to the bottom of it. Not making a judgment one way or another, Chelsea. I'm saying this, I'm above it all when I say this. We've got to get to the bottom of it.
Right.
If for no other reason than a great big portion of the United States electorate worries that it's real. And with that in mind, if we just ignore it and roll into the 2022 election and then the 2024 election, it's going to be the problem that never went away that is worse than it was. So in the name of the country getting along with itself and having faith in our elections, we have to run to ground this whole idea that this company called Dominion had a software ability to shave votes and to make one guy the winner and one guy not the winner. It's not my assertion. I have no idea if it's true, but there are credible people of sober mind that are asserting this. And I think that obviously that's what the courts are for. Mm-hmm. And we've got to all pump the brakes a little bit and let this play out before we all decide. But the toothpaste is out of the tube. It feels like the whole world is celebrating Joe Biden's victory, and he's getting congratulating calls. He's got the office of the president-elect, and he's naming people. And just for a moment, I'm a little afraid to imagine what happens if the Donald Trump lawyers lay a dead cat at the door of a federal judge, maybe the Supreme Court, that says, look at this. This is fraud. And everyone has to agree that is fraud. And if it's so big that the election has to stop in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan or Georgia or Maricopa County, then what happens to the country if it rolls into the House of Representatives? Forgetting who actually gets to be the president, just what happens to our electorate and our culture and our functioning and all that other stuff. That's why I say my first answer to your question is it's a very delicate moment in U.S. history. And I think we should all just, as best we can, be still, be calm as we can.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point about the broader implications of that, right? Where it's not just a question about the presidency. It truly is a question about, do we have faith in our electoral process? And how deep does that faith go? And what do we need to do to restore that faith in the minds of either, half of the electorate at this point or all of the electorate at some time? And this is an unprecedented time, and I'm tired of using that word in 2020, but that's just where we are. So I guess what do we expect from here in terms of that process? How long might it take? And then what's the impact of that on the transition, if it is in fact a transition from one administration to another? What is the impact of that on whatever the next administration is in the White House?
Yeah, it's all unprecedented, and but I think we'll get over it. in normal circumstances, that the incumbent welcomes the winning. I mean, the incumbent who's lost the presidency welcomes the guy that won the presidency and says the American people have spoken, and symbolically hands the keys of the federal government over to the new guy. That's not going to happen this year, no matter what. That's not going to happen. Now, the country, I think we just come to expect to see that happen. I mean, we won't see it, but we'll all live through it. I think the federal government will continue to percolate, and world leaders will stand by, and nothing's going to blow up. But it's going to be uncomfortable. It's just going to be like a giant family fight on the global stage, and everyone's seen the world's most perfect representative democracy just have this intramural exercise. I think we're going to live through it. I really do. But in the meantime, that's one thing. The other thing is, by now there have been so many assertions by the credible people I was referencing earlier, not only Trump himself, but Trump lawyers, et cetera, mouthpieces, that they either have to produce that smoking gun or that dead cat, as I referenced earlier. They have to actually show cards, pick your analogy, sooner than later, or whatever patience there is for this kind of activity is just going to dissipate. Yeah. And there won't be any hope for getting the toothpaste back in the tube. I think the hard calendar date is sometime in December, when the Electoral College actually does its thing. That means, it's today, November 18th. That means we've got less than a month of figuring this out. So my expectation is we've got a month or so of real tumult, of legal implication and electoral implication. The Trump campaign is going to have to prove out, and if they do, then all the doors are off, and no one can tell you what's going to happen, other than the estimate that if for some reason one or more states are somehow invalidated, then it will roll into the U.S. House of Representatives. And the expectation there, because one state gets one vote, it's not per person, and one state or one vote means Donald Trump gets reelected, because there are more red state delegations than there are blue state. And by the way, Arizona is a blue state delegation. Indeed. So we would be, I would assume Mr. Gallego, Mr. Grijalva, and the rest would all decide to cast their vote for Joe Biden. But there are more red states than that. So that's the prognostication. But hey, anyone listening to me is as good as me and guessing where it's going to be. That's I'm just trying, as a citizen, trying to love it and say, we can do this, America. We can do this. Right. But in the meantime, the social media runs the world like some sort of weird cancer, and everyone's saying everything to everyone. And oh my gosh, I worry about our collective nature. I do. I worry about our collective nature. I hope it holds throughout this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the collective discord as well turns back into something that we're a little more used to in terms of our unity as a citizenship, I think. But it sounds like it's going to be at least until December that we really have any hope of getting resolution and beginning the process of closure, I guess, on this election and this year. So going back, I guess, to some hypotheticals, assuming and I'll ask this for both administrations, assuming that President Biden administration is what takes over, what can we expect in terms of his agency appointments? We have seen sort of where he's shown his cards a little bit in terms of some of his senior staff, but are we going to see just sort of a rollback to familiar names from the Obama administration, sort of taking that infrastructure and setting it back in place? Or do you think that a Biden administration will branch away significantly from sort of the Obama mold or the Obama strategy?
Yeah, my guess is it's going to have its own signature. There's certainly going to be familiar figures from the Obama administration, because it was also the Joe Biden administration, and those people all know those people. And loyalty and trust are the first two items on appointee lists. You could appoint anyone. So you're appointing people that you want to reward, that you already trust, that you already know are on your team, that are going to screw things up, that sort of thing. So I think that means a great many people that were in the Obama Biden administration will at least start out in the Biden administration. Vice President-elect Harris is going to have her own imprint because I think she's going to have an oversized influence on Joe Biden himself. And given that nature, that leads me to this thought that the Democratic Party, for better or for worse, has stepped to the left. And I think that it's going to be a left-leaning administration, more left-leaning than the Obama administration. And how that manifests itself, it might be, a certain activism at EPA, but I think some entities will hold their more traditional silo, and I think Department of Agriculture is one of them. I think labor and agriculture and some of the other, maybe transportation, some of the other more traditional, less activist kind of things will remain. But there's no doubt that the Vice President-elect or the President-elect, Vice President Joe Biden, is going to have a loud megaphone in one of his ears blaring in terms of the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party and his desire to reward and placate and keep still that wing. And I just don't know which cabinet positions it will be, but they will be for sure.
That makes sense to me. And so then I guess kind of the same question for the Trump administration. Is it if he's successful in this election and prevails, was that a mandate in favor of Trump? Will he take that to be, I guess, even more bold and have kind of the same volatility in some of his appointments and hires? Or do you think we see a significantly different tone coming out of that office?
I think we get more of what we've seen in Donald Trump. I mean, imagine this, war game this for a minute. Imagine the only way Donald Trump holds the Oval Office is if the Trump campaign proves that there was an orchestrated effort by a vendor in a handshake with the Biden administration to turn over the will of the American people. Mm-hmm. If that's proven, at least in one state, you don't have to prove it in 50 states.
Right.
But if you prove that in Pennsylvania, and the Supreme Court of the United States says Pennsylvania doesn't count because of the fraud, and this thing rolls into that, I can't even believe I'm saying this, and this thing rolls into the House of Representatives, if that is how Donald Trump stays in the White House, it's not going to be business as usual. It's going to be whatever the first administration was on some sort of drug, and it might be rocket fuel kind of drug. It might be, who knows? What will the American people do with that? I mean, what will the progressive left do with that?
Yeah.
Will Portland go back to burning along with Chicago and other places, or will they just fold their arms and say, "Well, we got caught"? No, I mean, there's going to be this tumult within the electorate, and that will all be felt by the sitting congressmen and senators and the folks that run the federal government. They'll all feel it. We'll feel it at the gubernatorial level, the state legislative level. It'll impact every single ounce of American self-governance, from the Oval Office all the way to the sheriff of Maricopa County. And so in that spirit, I can't imagine anything like a normal presidency with Donald Trump stays there. It's gonna be a lot more of righteously indignant Donald Trump saying they tried to steal the election and I proved it. And the implications of that are so vast that it scares me to confront it. It really does.
So, I mean, it sounds like regardless of the administration, there's going to be some moves to the extreme corners of the ideological part of the party either way. And one of the things that happened that was a bit of a surprise to many on election night was that the Democrats lost part of their lead in the House of Representatives, lost some seats that they thought they were going to hold, didn't pick up some seats that they thought they were going to. And there's some argument right now amongst Democratic operatives as to why that is. And, there's the progressive wing that I think you're absolutely correct is going to have a megaphone in any Biden administration saying, well, it's because you didn't go progressive enough, versus the moderates saying, no, it's because you all went too progressive and you lost your message. How do you think that sort of dynamic is going to play into what happens in the House of Representatives in the next year?
Yeah, I think the first tangible evidence of everything you just said is Nancy Pelosi does not remain as Speaker because of the family fight the Democrats are having. There's a lot of noise just between Democrats about that very dynamic. In my political lifetime in Arizona and 30 years of being active in this thing, it's always the Republicans that are having the family fight out. We're not conservative enough, or whatever. And boy, that played out in the legislature. I can tell you a lot of stories. In recent election cycles, it's happening on the Democratic side. It happened some of that in Arizona with incumbent Democratic legislators getting liberal primaries. It certainly happened on a national scale. And now that they've lost seats, when Joe Biden won and got more votes than any other human being ever to run for anything in the United States, they're wondering what went wrong, and the finger pointing has begun. And then there's the natural ambition of politicians that want to be the Speaker, and it's time to play chess and get the queen out and put somebody else in. So I think Democrats are going to hold the majority, but by the thinnest majority they've had since 100 years or something. I mean, I don't remember the stat, but they're going to barely be able to to gavel in and gavel out, and anything controversial will splinter that majority and will fail out, because there are certainly Democrats in centrist districts that just don't want to ride along with Alexandria Cortez because she's from Brooklyn, and that may win there, but it don't win in Nebraska type of thing. So I think the Democrats are going to have a much harder time, and a lot of it's going to depend on who's the president. And assuming Georgia puts at least one Republican in the U.S. Senate, the Senate's going to remain Republican, and that will serve as its own temperate nature. That plus a smaller Democratic majority in the House, a divided American people, they're going to limit a lot of things. I think they're going to struggle to just keep the credit card line open and the continuing resolution of the United States federal government budgeting in the game. It's hard to imagine that lineup organizing itself to create an actual federal budget. We haven't really had one in years anyway. We just keep on raising the debt limit and stitching a bunch of stuff together so we don't have the government closed, which is the only thing none of those people can tolerate, because they'd all be out of office. So I'm afraid we're going to do more of that. And I mean, in the long run, I think things are going to be all right. In the short run, it's a fever that is going to have to break before we get back to whatever the good old days are of functioning federal government.
Gotcha. So you mentioned quickly Georgia. Tell us why Georgia's important and why the eyes of the nation are on that state at the moment.
Yeah, that poor state is going to have the entirety of all politics stomped 2 feet right on top of Atlanta and all of rural Georgia. They have, like we did, they have 2 U.S. Senate seats at the same time, and that's not normal. But they had someone that was out and they had to replace and that sort of thing. So it's not just 1, but it's 2. And for Democrats to be in the majority, they got to win both. And if Joe Biden's the president, which most Democrats think he is, then I mean, the Biden presidency and its success, judicial appointments, policy, you name it, is dependent on Mitch McConnell and the Republicans not saying no. So I think we're about to see ungodly sums of money spent on these two Senate seats by both sides, but because there's so much at stake. The only silver lining in all of it is it's a relatively short campaign. I think the election's in January.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So they can't go. It's not going to be. But there's only so many TV ads and direct mail and people going door to door and signs and anything else. In addition to every other rule break of the year 2020, we've witnessed a couple phenomenons we never thought would happen. One, a man jumped into the race for president and spent $500 million and got nothing. And that alone is stupefying.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk about state level stuff later, but same out-of-state groups spent millions in Arizona and got nothing. And Mark Kelly raised $83 million, which it's hard to calculate. that ability, not to mention how you'd spend all that in the Phoenix and Tucson television markets. So Georgia is ground zero for who runs the Senate. That's the short answer. And so all resources will go there. And weirdly enough, Donald Trump and Joe Biden will go there. And like continue the fun. Are you a Trump guy or anti-Trump guy, or a Trump guy or a Biden guy? And that's going to play out in the Atlanta TV market. So if you're traveling through that airport, it's one of the busiest in the whole country,
right.
You'll see an ad. There's no doubt. You probably have somebody escort you from your plane to the next plane and want to talk because you're going to have so much fun.
Probably so. And, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, had a chance to talk to them a little bit yesterday, and they said, honestly, the thing they're focused on right now, because they know just the amount and the extent of what's coming into that state, their voters are so fatigued and they're so over it. And so they're really focused more right now on just, hey, you still got to vote, get out the vote again, and just worried about people who are so sick of it that they just turn off the TV and they don't go to the polls. And so we'll see if that plays into an election that in the general had record turnout across the nation. Now, if there's a tipping point there and sort of that straw that breaks the camel's back, I think is going to be interesting to see among Georgia voters in particular.
I do too.
So you did mention Mark Kelly. Let's move there. Turn a little closer to home. Was anybody surprised by Captain Kelly's win over Martha McSally?
No, I think the short answer is no. All the conventional wisdom, all the chattering class at the Capitol, et cetera, was all, there's no way this guy can lose. Martha McSally, I kind of feel badly for her. She got to touch the U.S. Senate floor as a member of that body, but never got to be legitimized by a win. And she has the poor resume of having lost 2 U.S. Senate races in a row between her service. I just feel on a personal level badly for her, because that must really be tough to be that close to it and to realize you don't get it. Just on like in some sort of novel tragedy. She had the unfortunate circumstance of running against 2 of the very best candidates Democrats have ever put up for the U.S. Senate. I mean, Kyrsten Sinema is probably the most talented politician alive in Arizona today. She's got a Clinton-esque ability to charm anyone she talks to. And that's a powerful thing. Not to mention she raises millions of dollars and has the kind of personality that gets along with both sides of the aisle back in DC where it matters. She's going to be a long-term important player for Arizona, long-term. Mark Kelly, in addition to having no political resume of which to attack, is a fighter pilot and an astronaut and married to Gabby Giffords. And so it's just an amazing thing. The criticism of Senator Kelly is he spent tens of millions of dollars and said nothing other than I look good in a black t-shirt and she wants to take away your health care. And I got to give it to them. They know their audience, or at least they know how to run a campaign. Those ads made everyone feel good. The Mark Kelly ads, great ads. And when they closed it with him and Gabby sitting on the couch together and Gabby saying he's a great man, I'm like, how do you deal with that? I mean, poor Martha McSally must be sitting on her own couch going, how am I supposed to deal with that? When most voters are making a calculation with their heart and not their head, and that's just the way it is. We'd like to think in the aggregate, people are saying, well, I'm this way on guns and life and whatever. But most people are doing this instinctual, I like him or I don't like him, or I like her or I don't like her. And when it comes to that, Mark Kelly just had the cards to play and played them well. So he ran the same campaign Kyrsten ran. And I don't think we could talk about his win and Senator Sinema's win without pointing out that while they score as blue on the national stage, they don't run as Democrats in Arizona. You don't win Arizona as a Democrat. And just ask David Garcia, who ran against Doug Ducey as a Democrat, while Kyrsten was running against Martha as something else. And Kyrsten won, and of course Garcia got nothing. So it's an amazing thing to watch the phenomenon of the progressive wing or the Democratic wing, active wing of Arizona tolerate Senator Sinema doing that, and Mark Kelly, tolerate them not giving them the kind of love and attention during a campaign that like the Republicans Republicans cannot get away with that. Martha McSally, if the minute everybody says, well, Senator McSally got cratered by Trump, that she needed to separate herself from Trump. I'm telling you, if she would have said, Donald Trump is infuriating and I need to separate myself from him, she would have, instead of losing by 2%, she'd have lost by 22% because her base would have just abandoned her. So she was married, politically speaking, to Trump, had to ride in the same boat with him, and this is the outcome. So I'm looking forward to Mark Kelly being that kind of centrist, Dennis DeConcini style U.S. senator. I think that's what he's going to be. I think he's going to follow right behind style-wise with Sinema. They get along great. They're both going to be in the minority, apparently, at least for this term. And so, in terms of Arizona and our delegation and all that, it means we probably step back in the way of our influence. And that's one of the direct things. But, the next election is already 2 years from now, and it feels like yet tomorrow, and speculation is rife with who's going to take on Mark Kelly, because after all, he has to run again to end John McCain's seat and start a new one. And so that'll be a subject for another call, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think you're right. If Kelly is really looking forward in his career in Arizona politics, he will follow the mold of Sinema, right? And come in and do the things that she's doing and being sort of that maverick, to use a word that is familiar for someone sitting in that Senate seat, right? What will be the signs out of the gate that is Kelly's plan? He didn't play a lot of his cards in the campaign. We don't know a whole lot about him, really, and that was really one of the only criticisms that was lobbied against him. What will show us, okay, this is the way he's going to go, this is his plan? What should we look out for in the early days of his time as a senator?
One of the first reactions I have to that is thinking of Senator Sinema at the State of the Union speech being the only Democrat to stand up and applaud the president at certain times of his applause lines. I know that's not a vote. That doesn't change policy, but the symbolism of that is so powerful that it's one reason she's a superstar, is she can look at her own caucus and saying, guess what? I'm going to be my own person. And that makes her weirdly more valuable in that whole game back there. I think if Mark Kelly is doing something similar in his own symbolic way, you'll know that he's signaling that I'm an independent guy. I really am. And I hope he does. I mean, in terms of my own view of self-governance and what a U.S. senator should do back there for Arizona, I hope he does. When it comes to, he's going to vote for Chuck Schumer as a leader, and that's the way it is. But beyond that, it might be judges. It all depends. If it's a Biden presidency, judges are going to be easy for Mark Kelly. Yeah. If it's a Trump presidency, they're not. Every time Trump puts a judge through, it's a big decision for Kyrsten Sinema because she's balancing these factors. And so I'm looking for, the right policy point. The other idea I have on Mark Kelly is let's watch him decide what he really cares about in way of issues. Because as you say, we have no idea what he really cares about. We barely understand what he thinks, other than beer ought to be cheap, everybody ought to have health care, and okay. I hate those kind of campaigns. But those kind of campaigns work. All right. So now what? Now you actually have to govern, not campaign. Mm-hmm. What you care about. I don't think he's going to throw himself into agriculture. I think he's going to throw himself into military. Or the space thing is too much of a niche. So he's an astronaut, but NASA's a blip in the federal scheme of things. But the defense budget's not. And as a veteran, I would imagine that's where he'll drift, and we'll see.
Okay. Well, we've got a couple of questions from the audience. If you still have a few minutes with us, we'll ask those and let you give your input there. The first is, does the whole idea of unity, collaboration, and compromise in federal level politics, is that just commentary for the history books, or does that actually happen amongst federal politicians?
It only happens when there's some sort of mutually beneficial avoidance of destruction. I mean, I know it's a really pessimistic thing, but it's good to be out of the matrix and in the real world. And in DC, The real world is who has power. That's all that matters. That is all that matters. Say it again. That's all that matters. And so when you see collaboration, it's because each side is calculated. It's in their own self-interest. I wish it was like the classroom academic exercise we were taught in the way of, let's come together for the common good. I wish it was. But I don't think it's ever been thus. This is humanity, and we're all failed human beings. And it's just the nature of the elixir that's in the water back there, and the adoration, and the power. No, it's self-interest. And so when you see collaboration, like when they all vote to extend the credit line to avoid the government shutdown, that's because they all are afraid to go back to their individual districts or states and say, I couldn't get it together. So I don't think we're going to get any more collaboration. I would imagine, and I can say this with some confidence, before the advent of social media, before the advent of activist journalism, I mean, broadcasting really is what I'm thinking about. It was easier to do. It was easier to go home and shake your fist around, but then in the halls of Congress, when something had to go, to say, I'll give you this, you give me that, let's all go together, and then march forward. But now there's a 24/7 guillotine that's ready to take your head off if you even have lunch with the other guy. And that is something that puts a damper on the whole thing. It happens at the legislature.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even in the Arizona legislature. You just want to cross aisles and be friendly. You will get side-eye comments from the right or the left. What are you doing over there? Who are you? Why are you talking to those people? Type of thing. Imagine voting together. I mean, imagine a compromise where it's really in the best interest. You have to go back and explain it to the active base, who's all feeding themselves with 24-hour-a-day opinion, and it's very hard to overcome because you're risking your reelection in the most dramatic fashion to do something practical in the middle in the name of moving things forward. There's not a big constituency for that in any primary election, and you have to go through a primary to get to a general. So that's the name of it. I don't blame politicians. I blame us. This is people of Arizona. This is the American people. This is how we are. We're thinking red and blue. In the primary, we're thinking we want, that guy that carries our flag. And very few are saying we want the guy that can win the general, that most looks like the guy that can carry our flag. No, very few voters do that. They want the purist on the left and the right. And then when they get to the general, the gladiators have it out. And then when they get to governance, they have to remain on that same path because that's what their base that put them there is demanding.
Yeah.
Regrettably, that's the nature of things. And until that fever breaks, and I don't know how it breaks, some sort of independent, that's the academic classroom exercise, get somebody out of party and into independence. I'm above this. I don't have to pander to this or that. I don't need the right or the left to get to the general. But right now, that American people apparently are not quite ready for that. Donald Trump is the closest thing we've ever had to that, really, that was successful. We've had independent runs for president, Ross Perot, et cetera, that got a significant amount of the vote to deny George Bush, the first one, the presidency, that sort of thing. Trump, not a Republican, takes over the Republican Party because he has to run in one of those lanes, but acts like Donald Trump, not Republican. So that's the closest thing we've got. Maybe the next step is someone who's not in a party. But on a federal level, I can't imagine that. On a state level, I can imagine it. Someday in our lifetime, somebody with the money, they have to be self-funded. Will just step in and say, I can do this, and I'm above these people. And then maybe toward the end of our lifetime, there is an ability of somebody to actually raise money that way because money will chase possibilities. Anyway, I'm rambling. But I think it's blame. We get the kind of government we deserve. That's actually a truism that I believe in.
Fair enough. Kind of going off of that, what are the chances the Congress figures out how to do budgets and utilizes the power of the purse? Is that something that'll happen in our lifetime where we see a federal budget again?
No, I'm very pessimistic about that, and I'm pessimistic about the federal budget in general. I mean that I'm cynical now. I realize I was a freshman legislator in 1989, and here we are in 2020, and I've seen every legislative session between 1989 and now. And guess what? The same exact issues we wrestle with every single session. I remember as a freshman going, "Well, we solved that," and boy, was I wrong. Every single session we relive, and the federal government, regrettably, is the reserve currency and has an unending credit line. Evidently, we can write $1 trillion and up checks in one stroke, and turns out we still get 2.5% interest rates, gold flat, and belief in the system.
Yeah.
It's beyond me how that happened. Somewhere along the line, that has to end, and that's what worries me. That's the only thing that worries me. The point I was making earlier is the federal government will always be a chaotic, messy place where they're going to fight over the same issues year in and year out. As long as we don't bankrupt ourselves, then I can tolerate that. But if we bankrupt ourselves, then what do we have? We benefit from being the only place on earth that really is the rule of law and that will pay its debts. And so we have this unending money supply. Smarter people than me you could interview to tell you how that can't sustain itself. I personally don't believe it can. But until we get to a point where it can't, this is water going downhill. This is the point of least resistance, not compromise, but the old-fashioned compromise where the House wants 2 and the Senate wants 4, and so the compromise should be 3, but instead the compromise is 6.
Yeah.
So that's the phenomenon that has taken us over, is that everybody gets everything. And in the course of human history, that fails. There's no such thing as a free lunch, I think somebody once said. And that's how do we get on this topic? That's where we are on the federal level. So, but like I said, I'm just a little sandbars in Arizona, and I can see that, but everybody can see it. But we don't know what to do. The sun comes up tomorrow, and our banks still run. We still borrow money. We go about our lives. The faith is in the system, and the faith comes out of the system. Be careful. That's my preach for today.
Well, it's good. It's good preaching. So keep it coming. We didn't talk a lot about the House of Representatives races in Arizona, partially because we basically ended up with the same thing we started out with. We're still where we were, but redistricting is happening, as I'm sure you well know, a lot of our listeners know. So tell us what you think the impact of redistricting will have on the congressional makeup in Arizona.
Well, the fun gift is we get a new congressional seat, so we'll have 10, and that's good. It's good for Arizona's influence on the national stage, and in my world, it's good because there are ambitious people that want to go to Congress, and we got another seat to run in. The redistricting thing is going to be very important, and as an editorial comment, I hate the way we do it. I liked it when it was in the legislature. The independent commission, I think, there's no such thing. Can't take the politics out of redistricting. You cannot. I don't care what you say. So I don't like the way we do it, but the voters gave it to us, so I got to tolerate it. And somewhere along the line, 3 people, not 5, but of the 5, 3 are really going to decide how this goes, and that magical unicorn of an independent person is going to be the deciding vote. I hate that system, but that's what's going to happen. And when it does happen, we'll see where the cards lay. As it turns out, because some people very much value this phenomenon, we do have, a couple of nominally swing congressional House seats. We every single time we redistrict, we have to draw Mr. Grijalva's and Mr. Gallego's districts first, because the federal government demands that we put majority-minority districts together. Much to the dismay of my Democratic friends, because it crowds all the Democrats in the same circle, so we can get a Latino congressman.
Right.
I mean, no way to run a railroad, and that's another editorial comment. But so we're going to draw those 2, and then the other 8 are up for grabs. Both those 2, I think, are going to get bigger given the dynamics of population and et cetera. And then the West Valley and the East Valley and Maricopa County are the growing places, and Pinal. So we look for more representation that is hooked to Maricopa County in some level, because that's where the people are. And Pinal's been growing and is going to grow in its influence, but poor Pinal County, my home county, is probably going to be carved up, right? It's probably going to be, it's not going to be, maybe they like it that way, but if you have like one congressman, that guy's going to listen to you. If you have three, they got other constituents. So Pinal's going to be this crossroads of redistricting. I hope it turns out well for him.
Definitely. Well, Stan, we really appreciate your time today. I know I've learned a lot. This has been really insightful. Any final closing comments that you want to leave us with?
I have a lot of respect for the Arizona Farm Bureau, and I never get to say it to your audience. But when I was in the legislature, they were very kind to me, but beyond that, provided great information and perspective about issues that matter. And that has been the way it's been for the 32 years I've been active down there. I know that Mr. Michelle runs the thing, and I guess there was no one else that was available. But no, I'm kidding, of course. There's he and the team, your team, the Farm Bureau, are well-respected people at the state capitol who have the voice of agriculture, and that's a cool thing, because once it's in your blood, as you know, it's always in your blood, and it makes me proud to see Arizona agriculture represented so well at the state capitol. So it's a free advertisement, and it's a testimonial that's unrehearsed and uncoerced. I very much have a lot of respect for the organization. You do a great job. They're going to need you more than ever as Arizona urbanizes, which it's been doing constantly since I got here. And I was born here, but since I got here in the legislature, it's going to be more and more important that agriculture has a sharp, clear message from credible, tough people, and the Farm Bureau does that. So good for you.
Well, thank goodness this is being recorded. Gotta say.
Oh, that's right.
Well, you know, we appreciate that very much, and I've got to say it's all because of our members, right? And the folks that take the time to show up and tell us what matters to them and what we need to do about it. That's what gives us all of our credibility, and so we're really grateful for allies like you and folks that we can work with down at the legislature as well. And it's going to be a crazy year, but we're looking forward to tackling it head on regardless. So for the folks in our audience, if you missed any of this, again, remember that all of our recordings will be posted on our website. Don't forget to join us at noon, where we'll be talking about the state election with some of our friends from Veritas LLC. But until then, we'll see you later. Stan, thank you again so much for joining us.
You bet. Good to be here. Have a great day.
Thank you.